If you're buying your first home, avoid these mistakes because it could save you thousands of dollars. Number one, shopping before having a pre-approval. We have seen it over and over again where people go out, they get excited, they're motivated, and they go look at homes, and then once they get their pre-approval, they don't get approved for enough, or they don't get approved at all, and then they wasted that time, and also that's an emotional roller coaster that you do not want to go through. So make sure you get your pre-approval first so that you can shop according to your actual budget and what works for you. Only focusing on the monthly payment. A lot of times people will look at a home and they'll say, oh, the principal and interest payment is going to be $1,500, $2,000. And they ignore the taxes, the insurance, HOA, mortgage insurance, flood insurance if you're in Florida, and maintenance costs. Some houses that you buy, there's maintenance that is paid by the HOA or maintenance that is paid by you. Insurance has gone up and down depending on hurricanes, and taxes vary as well. So you want to look at all of that put together because it can make a huge difference. I've seen people pay on top of the principal and interest. Their escrow payment sometimes amounts to the size of the mortgage payment. So it becomes double what they expected. Obviously, that's not always the case, but I encourage you to calculate and consider taxes, insurance. If you're a first-time home buyer, you'll also have mortgage insurance if you put anything less than 20% down, also HOA fees, and any maintenance that you need to pay for. Draining your savings account of the money needed for your down payment and closing costs. I know a lot of people, they want to have a good realtor that will negotiate for their down payment to be covered by some kind of down payment assistance or grant, or they want to work with a good realtor that'll help negotiate seller's concessions so that the seller would pay their closing costs. But it doesn't always get fully covered, and you have to make sure that you have enough reserves and savings for your down payment and closing costs. So don't go splurging before you close. Save every penny that you can. Skipping or cutting corners with the inspection. You don't want to cut corners on the inspection because this is where you can actually negotiate further with the seller. If anything comes up on the inspection that is a major repair or a very soon coming major repair, you can negotiate with them for a credit or on the price to help you save some money at closing. But there's two types of inspections that are the main ones that people do. The 4-point inspection, which covers the roof, the HVAC, the electrical, and the plumbing. Most insurance companies require you to do that one for them to insure the home if it's older than the year 2000. And if it's newer than the year 2000, you can still do it because you always want to do an inspection on your home that you're buying for yourself. In addition to that, there's a wind mitigation, which is another inspection that you can do to see how the house was nailed to the roof, or the roof to the house. And if you have what's called a third nail in the strapping, you get very big discounts on your insurance, especially here in Florida because of hurricanes and wind. So I encourage you, don't cut any corners when it comes to inspections. Underestimating closing costs. A lot of buyers, they get excited when they see they can buy their first home with 3.5% with the FHA loan, but they forget to calculate that they're going to have closing costs. And closing costs can range anywhere from 3 to 6% depending on a lot of factors. But I always tell my buyers, hey, calculate 8% between down payment and closing costs. That's a good projection of what you're going to pay out of pocket. If you want to be more conservative, go ahead and go a little bit higher. But if the house costs $200,000, 8% is about $16,000 that you're going to come up with in between the FHA loan down payment of 3.5% plus closing costs. That's just a projection that you could use to see about how much it's going to cost. In addition to that, remember, if you have a good realtor, he will help you negotiate with the seller to see if all of the closing costs, if not most of it, can get covered by seller's concessions. Maxing out your price that you were approved for. Just because you were approved for $350,000 doesn't mean you have to buy a house that costs $350,000. You can buy a house that costs $300,000. The lender will tell you, hey, this is how much you can afford with your income, but do you really want to maximize it? If you can, I would stay under or below your pre-approval amount a little bit so that you could have a more comfortable payment. You don't have to reach the maximum. You can stay under it and it'll give you a more comfortable payment. Making big financial decisions mid-process of buying a home, oh my gosh, I've seen it over and over again, where in the middle of buying a home, the buyer's under contract and they buy a car. That's the biggest number one mistake, is they buy a car, they get an auto loan, and now all of a sudden their debt to income ratio goes out of whack and they can no longer afford the home because of the new payment that they have on a car. That also applies to a credit card or anything. You don't want to touch your credit in the middle of buying a home. You don't want to do anything that increases your liabilities or payments, because that will drastically affect your ability to close, and it can mess up the entire transaction. Overlooking neighborhood research. You have to know the area where you're going to buy your first home, because if you buy it because it's beautiful and because it's affordable, but then it's 45 minutes away from work each and every day, that's an hour and a half going and coming, in gas, you're almost gonna have another, car payment or something. So you want to consider the neighborhood, the location, not only that you like it, but that it's also close to your children's school, the distance from work, and the things that you like to do, and also just safety and overall things to do in the area. Because if you, for example, live in Cape Coral, you might have to consider that you're going to have the expense of crossing the bridge every day. If you work in Fort Myers, and you're going to have the toll to pay every single day, which you have to budget for. So those are things to consider that a lot of times are overlooked with the excitement of the house. Ignoring first-time home buyer programs. A lot of times, if your lender and your realtor see that you have enough money to cover your down payment and your closing costs, they might not even mention that there's programs out there to help cover your down payment and your closing costs. So I encourage you to ask your lender, hey, I know I have enough money to cover all my down payment and closing costs, but is there any type of down payment assistance or grant available for me that I can use so that I can keep more money in my pocket? Some of those grants or assistance programs might require you to pay that money back, or that it might be recorded on the house, against the house, as a second silent mortgage. But either way, if you need to keep more money in your pocket, those are really good opportunities to take advantage of that aren't there for just anyone. But if you're a first-time home buyer, there are programs for you. Not asking enough questions. A lot of times you just buy a house, like if you're buying a car, and you just think, as long as I make the payment, everything's gonna be fine. But it's only when things are not fine that all the questions start coming up. And you want to know things. You want to ask your realtor to educate you on home ownership. How can you apply for what's called a homestead exemption that saves you a lot of money in taxes on your primary home? What can you do to save money in the long run? Once you pay down your house over 20% of its value. So for example, if the house, you bought it for $200,000, and now after 5-10 years, all of a sudden you paid it down to $160. Now you only owe 80%. Once you get below 80%, you can tell your lender to remove the mortgage insurance on the property, which will save you whatever that is. It could be $100, $150 a month. And there's a lot of things like that you want to know. What happens if you're late on the payment? How long does it take to fall into default? How long does it take to go into foreclosure? Think worst case scenario, ask those questions so that you can be prepared and not be surprised when things get rough. So don't hesitate to ask hard questions.